It was a Tuesday, one of those grey Midwestern mornings when the sky looks like old metal and the air smells of rain and oil. I was under the hood of a Chevy pickup at my shop, Caldwell's Auto Repair, when I heard the sirens. They weren't distant, they were coming straight toward me. I remember wiping my hands on a rag, frowning, thinking maybe there'd been a wreck out on Route 17. Then I saw Sheriff Tom Hargrove's car pull up, lights flashing, and behind him 2 cruisers more. He stepped out like a man who already owned the moment. "Peter Caldwell," he said, his hand on his belt, his voice carrying that rehearsed calm that hides something ugly underneath. "You're under arrest for the murder of Lisa Garrison." For a second I thought I'd misheard. Lisa? The waitress from the diner? The one who smiled at everyone and served me coffee every morning. My heart slammed against my ribs. The smell of gasoline filled my nose. "What?" I whispered. "That's crazy." I barely knew, but his hand was already pushing me against the hood. Cold metal, rough hands, cuffs biting into my wrists. People gathered outside, neighbors, customers, even old Mrs. Harper from across the street, staring as if they were watching a show. Mary's voice cracked through the crowd. "Tom, there must be some mistake." But Tom didn't look at her. He only said, "Tell it to the judge." As they shoved me into the back seat, I looked out the window and saw my little girl, Emily, standing by the shop door holding her school bag. She was crying and trying to run toward me, but Mary held her back. I screamed her name, but the door slammed. And the sound of sirens swallowed my voice whole. I didn't know it then, but that was the last time I'd see my shop, my freedom, and my daughter's unbroken trust, for 31 years. And as the car drove away, I caught Sheriff Hargrove's reflection in the mirror. He was smiling. The interrogation room smelled like burnt coffee and sweat. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, flickering like nervous eyes. Sheriff Hargrove and a younger deputy, Carl Jenkins, sat across from me. A tape recorder whirred between us. "Peter," the sheriff began, leaning forward, his wedding ring tapping the table, "your fingerprints were found on the victim's purse. You want to tell us how that happened?" My throat felt dry. "I fixed her car last week. She left her bag on the counter, and I handed it to her." "That's the only way," he smirked. "So you expect me to believe you didn't follow her home that night?" I slammed my palms on the table. "I didn't even know where she lived." He nodded slowly, pretending to write something down. I could tell he'd already decided. Maybe he'd decided before they even came for me. Hours passed. Questions, accusations, the same things over and over. When they finally let me see Mary, her eyes were red and trembling. "They're saying they found her blood on your shirt," she whispered. I stared at her. "Mary, that's impossible." "I didn't. They said you threw it out behind the shop. I remembered that shirt. I had cut my hand working on a rusted muffler that same day. I told her that. I begged her to believe me." But the room was spinning, the world collapsing inward. When they led me out to the holding cell, I heard the sheriff say quietly to Deputy Jenkins, "Don't worry. Carl, the town'll sleep easier tonight." The way he said it chilled me, like he was locking away a monster he knew didn't exist. That night, in the cell, the walls seemed to breathe with other men's despair. I pressed my forehead against the cold bars and whispered to no one, "They've made a mistake. Someone will fix this. Someone has to." But deep down, something inside me already knew nobody would. The trial came fast, too fast. 6 weeks later, I sat in a courtroom that smelled of polished wood and perfume, staring at 12 strangers who would decide the rest of my life. Sheriff Hargrove testified first, voice calm, eyes righteous. He spoke of evidence, emotive, and rage, words that didn't belong to me but fit like handcuffs around my name. Then came the lab reports, the bloody shirt, the timeline that never made sense. My lawyer, some court-appointed kid who couldn't have been more than 26, barely spoke. He didn't question Hargrove's version, didn't demand to see the actual chain of custody. When I looked at him, he just shrugged like he was already apologizing for losing. Mary sat behind me, her face pale, hands clutching Emily's shoulders. I turned once, tried to smile, but she looked away. I think that was the moment I truly broke. The jury took only 4 hours. When the verdict came, guilty of murder in the first degree, the sound didn't even feel real. Like thunder in a dream, Mary sobbed. Emily buried her face in her mother's dress. I wanted to scream, to tell them all how wrong they were, to tear the world apart with the truth, but my body just went still. A strange calm like sinking underwater. The judge said, "Life imprisonment." Sheriff Hargrove's lips twitched upward. As the bailiff led me away, I heard him whisper to someone near the door, "Justice served." I looked back one last time. The courtroom blurred through tears I refused to shed. That's when I promised myself something. I'd survive. I didn't know how or for how long, but I'd live long enough for the truth to claw its way out of the dark, even if it took the rest of my life. They took me from the courthouse in chains. I remember the clinking sound as the bus rolled out of Riverton, my hometown shrinking in the side mirror like a place that had never existed. I kept thinking about my shop, the smell of oil and dust, the old clock on the wall that ticked too loud. It had been my whole world, a place I'd built with my own hands. Now it was someone else's. Sheriff Hargrove made sure of that. Within a week, Caldwell's auto repair had been auctioned off to cover legal expenses. When the bus crossed the county line, I looked out the window and saw the last sign that said, "Welcome to Riverton." My stomach twisted. I wanted to believe that once people learned the truth, they'd welcome me back. But even then, a whisper inside me said no one's waiting. Weeks later, letters started coming, from friends, old church members, even my pastor, John Wilkes. At first, they sounded kind. "We're praying for you, Peter. The Lord knows the truth." But as months passed, they grew colder, shorter, then stopped altogether. Mary visited twice in that first year. Once with Emily, who sat stiff beside her, eyes wide and silent. The second time alone, her wedding ring was gone. She cried but didn't hold my hand. "I can't do this anymore, Peter," she said. "Emily's being bullied at school. People whisper when I walk into the grocery store. They call you a murderer." I told her to hold on, that I'd be out one day. She shook her head, eyes hollow. "You won't. Not in time for her to remember who you are." When she left, I pressed my palm against the cold glass that separated us. That was the last time I saw her as my wife, and that's when I realized it wasn't just a cell that held me. It was a whole town that had already decided to bury me alive. I used to replay that day in my head every night, the day of my arrest. How everyone had looked at me like they were seeing a stranger. The betrayal didn't come all at once. It came in pieces. First was Bill Turner, the guy who'd been my apprentice for 3 years. He took over my shop after the auction, renamed it Turner Auto and Sons. I heard about it from another inmate whose cousin lived in Riverton. Bill had even used my old slogan on the sign, "Honest work, honest price." The words burned in my chest like acid. Then came Pastor Wilkes, the man who'd baptized me, who used to say, "We're all broken vessels in need of grace." He stopped visiting after the first year. When my mother died, I asked if he'd come to the funeral. He sent a letter that said, "I think it's best for the family if you're remembered quietly, quietly." That word haunted me. It meant erased, forgotten. By the 3rd year, I stopped expecting letters. I stopped marking time by months. Time in prison isn't measured in days. It's measured in disappointments. One afternoon, while mopping the corridor outside the laundry, I overheard 2 guards talking about Riverton. "You hear about that Caldwell guy?" one said. "His wife remarried some banker from Wichita." The other laughed. "Can't blame her. Who'd wait for a killer?" My hand tightened around the mop handle until my knuckles went white. But I didn't speak. I'd learned something by then. Silence keeps you alive in places built to break you. That night I lay awake staring at the ceiling, listening to the hum of distant generators and the low murmurs of men who'd also lost everything. And I realized the truth. Riverton hadn't just turned its back. It had rewritten history, one whisper at a time. 5 years passed before I heard my daughter's voice again. It came in the form of a short, trembling phone call. Emily was 10 now, old enough to know shame but too young to understand lies. "Mom said you did something bad," she whispered. Her voice cracked through the static like glass breaking. "Is it true?" I closed my eyes, gripping the receiver until it hurt. "No, sweetheart. I didn't hurt anyone." There was silence. Then she said, "People at school say you're a monster." My throat locked. "Do you believe them?" Another pause. Then a small breaking, "I don't know." The line went dead. I sat there long after the call ended, the dial tone buzzing in my ear. Around me, other men were laughing, shouting, cursing, but their noise was distant. I felt something inside me collapse. Not my hope. Hope had already gone. It was something deeper, the part that still believed the world outside cared. That night I wrote Emily a letter. I told her about her first bike, about the smell of the shop, about how she used to fall asleep in my lap during baseball games. I ended it with, "I'll wait as long as it takes for you to know the truth." I sent that letter and dozens more after it. None ever came back. Years later, when the guard handed me a returned envelope marked address unknown, I finally understood. My little girl had vanished into a world where I didn't exist anymore. And yet, deep down, even as the prison walls closed tighter around me, I whispered a promise to the dark. One day she'll hear my name again, and when she does, it'll be for the truth. I still remember the smell of that courtroom, a strange mix of old wood polish, perfume, and something sour, like fear itself had soaked into the walls. Every sound echoed, the judge's gavel, the click of the stenographer's keys, even the shuffle of shoes on the tile. I sat there in a cheap suit, 2 sizes too big, the cuffs still red from the handcuffs I'd worn that morning. Across the room sat Sheriff Tom Hargrove, chest puffed out, polished badge gleaming like a lie that had been scrubbed until it shone. My court-appointed lawyer, Alan Greer, leaned over and whispered, "Keep calm. Peter, the jury likes a quiet defendant." Quiet, always quiet. That word had followed me since the first interrogation, as if silence could protect me from a system that had already made up its mind. The prosecution was led by District Attorney Leonard Price, a man with slick hair and a voice trained for television. He painted me as a jealous man obsessed with Lisa Garrison, the waitress who had turned him down. He said I killed her when she rejected me. Each word came out sharp, rehearsed, and soaked in certainty. When he called Sheriff Hargrove to the stand, the crowd leaned forward like it was church. Hargrove told the story clean and proud, how he'd followed the evidence, how my bloody shirt had been found behind my shop, how my fingerprints matched. I wanted to stand up, to scream the truth, that I'd cut my hand working, that the shirt wasn't blood from Lisa but mine. But Greer grabbed my arm and whispered again, "Quiet, Peter, don't look angry. I wasn't angry. I was drowning." When Mary took the stand, she looked small, fragile. Her hands trembled as she spoke. "Peter was different that week," she said softly. "He barely slept. He was short-tempered. She didn't mean to hurt me. I could see that. But every hesitant word she spoke became a nail sealing my coffin, and when the prosecutor asked her, "Did he ever talk about Lisa Garrison?" And she said, "He mentioned she was kind to him." The courtroom erupted in whispers. That was all it took. Kindness twisted into motive. By the end of the day, I knew I'd lost. But I didn't know yet how much of me they were going to take. The second week of trial, they brought out what they called evidence. A photograph of the alley where Lisa's body had been found, the bloody shirt they said was mine, and a timeline that could have been written by a ghost. When my lawyer stood to cross-examine the forensic technician, his hands shook. "Isn't it true," he asked, "that the evidence was, stored in an unsecured locker for several hours before being logged?" The technician hesitated, glancing toward the prosecutor. "Yes," he said. A flicker of hope lit in my chest, just a spark, but Price immediately objected. "Irrelevant, Your Honor. The chain of custody is intact." The judge agreed. The jury nodded. The spark died. Later that day, Deputy Carl Jenkins took the stand. He was just a kid, maybe 25, and he couldn't meet my eyes. His voice trembled as he read from a prepared statement. "I discovered the shirt near the dumpster behind Caldwell's auto. It appeared to have dried blood matching the victim's type." I watched his hands shake. He looked like a man trying not to drown in guilt. For a moment I thought he might tell the truth, that he'd found it days later, after the sheriff told him where to look, but he didn't. He swallowed hard and finished reading. When my turn came, Greer asked if I wanted to testify. My heart was hammering. "Yes," I said. "I have to," he sighed. "They'll tear you apart." "I've already been torn apart," I told him, so I stood. I told them everything. How I'd known Lisa only as a customer, how I'd been at home fixing the heater that night, how my wife and daughter had been asleep in the next room. I looked each juror in the eye. Some looked back. Some looked away, but when Price rose for cross-examination, he smiled like a man who already knew the ending. "Mr. Caldwell," he said, "if you're innocent, why did the sheriff find your fingerprints on the victim's purse?" I opened my mouth, but before I could answer, he added, "And why did she tell a friend she was afraid of you?" Gasps, a murmur. My voice vanished. I never got to respond. And just like that, truth became background noise. The verdict day came heavy with rain. I could hear it hitting the courthouse windows like 1,000 small hammers. The jury filed in, faces pale, unreadable. I tried to find one kind pair of eyes, one flicker of doubt. There was none. The foreman stood, holding the paper like it burned his hands. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Peter Caldwell, guilty of murder in the first degree." The world tilted. The sound of my mother's voice crying out, Mary sobbing into her hands, Emily screaming, "Daddy!" It all blurred together into something unreal. I wanted to shout, to grab the bench, to beg them to look at me. Really look. But the bailiff's hand on my shoulder kept me still. My body obeyed even as my soul tore apart. The judge spoke words that still echo in my head. "You are hereby sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole." The crowd rustled, satisfied. Sheriff Hargrove shook hands with the prosecutor, smiling like a man who'd just saved the world. As they led me away, Mary stood. Our eyes met for a fraction of a second. She mouthed something I couldn't hear, but I think it was "I'm sorry." Then she turned away. In the hallway, I caught sight of Deputy Jenkins. He looked sick, pale, sweating. I wanted to ask him why he stayed silent, why he didn't speak, but the guards shoved me forward. Outside, the rain had stopped. The air smelled of wet earth and rusted iron. The transport van waited with its back doors open, dark as a grave. When the doors slammed behind me, I pressed my forehead to the cold steel and whispered, "One day you'll see. All of you." The engine roared to life. The sound was deep, final. The sound of a life being erased, and as we drove away, I watched Riverton fade into the distance, thinking how strange it was that a whole town could watch a man drown and call it justice. They say the first night in prison is when you learn what kind of man you really are. I learned I was the kind that bleeds quietly. The bus pulled into Kansas State Penitentiary at dusk. The sky was purple and cracked with lightning, like the world itself was warning me not to enter. When the doors opened, the smell hit me first, sweat, bleach, and something rotten like iron mixed with despair. Guards shouted orders that echoed down the concrete halls. "Eyes forward. Hands behind your back." That's when I met him, Rick Malone. Broad shoulders, buzz cut, eyes so pale they looked like frost. He stood at the intake desk, chewing gum and smiling like he'd been waiting for me. "Caldwell, huh?" he said, flipping through a clipboard. "The wife killer." I opened my mouth to protest, but before a word left me, he slammed the clipboard on the counter. "You don't talk unless I ask. You understand me, killer." I nodded. He leaned in close, his breath sour. "Good. We like quiet ones. Quiet ones last longer." The others laughed. They stripped me down, sprayed me with cold disinfectant water, handed me a faded orange uniform, and marched me through the cell block. Men shouted from behind bars, some mocking, some just desperate to be heard. When my cell door clanged shut, the sound vibrated through my bones. My cellmate, Elder Henry Brooks, was an old man with silver hair and eyes that looked like they'd seen every sorrow there was. He nodded once. "First day?" "First," I said. He smiled sadly. "It won't be your worst." That night, as I lay on the thin mattress staring at the cracked ceiling, I could still hear Rick Malone's laughter echoing down the corridor. It wasn't human laughter. It was the sound of a man who enjoyed being God in a place where no one could fight back, and in that moment, I realized something terrifying. My trial hadn't ended. It had just moved inside these walls. The days blurred fast. Metal doors, shouting guards, the clang of trays in the mess hall. Time didn't flow in prison. It dripped. Every sound was the same, every smell the same. The only thing that changed was the level of cruelty. Malone made sure of that. The first time he hit me was 2 weeks in. I was pushing a mop in the hallway near the infirmary when another inmate, a young kid named Marcus, dropped a bucket of water by accident. Malone appeared out of nowhere, his boots echoing like thunder. "Who did that?" He barked. Marcus froze. I stepped forward. "It was an accident," I said quietly. Malone's grin spread slow and cruel. "Didn't ask for your sermon, preacher." Then with one hard swing, his baton cracked across my ribs. The sound was sharp, clean, final. I gasped, fell to my knees. The taste of blood filled my mouth. He leaned down, his voice calm. "You clean that up, Caldwell, all of it. Before I make you bleed again." Marcus just stared, terrified. I nodded and wiped the water with trembling hands. Malone watched, smiling the whole time. Later in the infirmary, Henry Brooks sat beside my cot. "He gets off on it," he said quietly. "Malone picks one man to break, one to remind the rest who runs this hellhole." "Why me?" I asked. Henry's eyes met mine. "Because you still look like you believe in something. I didn't understand then, but I would. Belief is in God, in justice, in your own innocence. That was what they hated most. It made you harder to crush." That night Malone passed by my cell. He stopped, tapped the bars with his baton and said softly, "Sleep tight, preacher. You'll need it." And I knew what that meant. It wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Weeks turned into months and Malone's games grew darker. Sometimes he'd unlock my cell at night, just to throw my mattress into the hallway. Other times, he'd make me scrub the floors until my hands bled, then step in the water and laugh. One morning I was hauling laundry when he called me over. "Caldwell," he said, "come here." He was leaning against the wall, arms crossed. "You ever think about Lisa Garrison?" "Bet she screamed, huh?" Something inside me snapped. I looked him straight in the eye. "You don't know a damn thing about her." His face changed, just a flicker, before he slammed his fist into my jaw. The floor came up hard. I tasted iron and dust. He grabbed my shirt, whispering, "You talk back again, I'll make you wish you were guilty." That night, Henry patched me up with a damp towel. "You can't fight him, Peter," he said. "He wants your soul, not your body." But I couldn't help it. Every hit, every word from Malone twisted tighter inside me. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was rotting with rage I couldn't use. One evening after lockdown, I heard Malone's footsteps fade down the corridor. Henry whispered from his bunk, "You still believe you'll get out?" I stared into the dark. "I have to," he sighed. "Then hold on to that, because hope's the only weapon they can't take." I didn't sleep that night. I lay awake, hands trembling, thinking about Mary, about Emily, about the life that had been ripped away. And somewhere in that silence I made a vow, not just to survive, but to outlive every man who tried to destroy me. I didn't know it yet, but one day, that same guard who laughed at my pain would be the one calling me sir. And that day was coming, slow, cruel, inevitable. There's a sound prisons have that you never forget, a kind of humming that lives inside the walls. It's not from machines. It's from pain that never stops echoing. By my 5th year inside, I'd learned to tell what kind of day it would be by that hum alone. Some mornings it was low and dull, like the place was asleep. Others it was sharp, alive, like the whole building was breathing anger. That morning the air felt heavy even before I opened my eyes. Henry Brooks was sitting on his bunk, Bible open on his lap, staring at nothing. "Bad night?" I asked. He nodded slowly. "Kid in C block didn't make it." I didn't have to ask what that meant. Suicide was as common as breathing here. Hope was a dangerous thing. It made men dream, and dreaming was something the walls didn't forgive. Later that day, we were marched to the yard. Winter wind cut through the air like blades. Men walked in slow circles, eyes on the ground, pretending to move while really just trying not to feel. I kept my hands deep in my pockets, counting steps, 51 around the perimeter, one for each year I should have lived free. Malone was at the tower, his rifle slung over his shoulder. He saw me, smirked, and raised 2 fingers to his temple, like a mock gun. A joke, a warning, both. That night I found a note slipped under my cell door. 3 words written in pencil: "You'll never leave." No signature. But I knew the handwriting. Malone's threats weren't about fear anymore. They were about breaking the last piece of me that still believed in tomorrow. I looked at Henry and whispered, "Maybe they're right. Maybe there's no getting out." He didn't look up from his Bible. "Then die standing, not begging." I lay there in the dark, the words bouncing inside my skull. Die standing, not begging. I didn't know it yet, but the day that followed would make me understand what he meant. 2 days later, they brought in a new inmate. His name was Luis Ortega, small guy, maybe 30, tattoo of a cross on his neck. He came in shaking, eyes darting like a trapped animal. Henry and I helped him adjust, showed him how to keep his head down, when to speak, when not to. But Luis, he wasn't built for this place. Some men find strength here. Others, they just vanish one piece at a time. One night, he whispered to me, they told me I'd get 10 years. Then they changed it to life. I got a little girl, man. Same age as yours, I froze. "How do you know I have a daughter?" He pointed at the photo taped to the inside of my locker, a fading picture of Emily, 5 years old, gap-toothed smile. "She's beautiful," he said. "You'll see her again," but his voice cracked on the word again, and that's when I knew he didn't believe it for himself. 3 nights later, during count, I heard shouting from D Block, then silence. The kind of silence that hurts your ears. Later, the rumor spread. Luis had hung himself with a bedsheet. When they carried his body out, I caught a glimpse through the bars. His face was pale, almost peaceful. For a moment, I envied him. That night, I didn't pray. For the first time in my life, I didn't ask God for anything. I just stared at the ceiling, listening to that hum again, louder now. Like the prison itself was swallowing him whole. Henry whispered from his bunk, "Don't let his death take you too." I wanted to answer, but words felt useless. Hope was dying in this place, and not suddenly but slowly, like smoke disappearing into air, and I could feel it slipping out of me. One breath at a time. The day Henry Brooks died, the world went quiet. It was summer, hot enough to make the walls sweat. He'd been coughing for weeks, but the infirmary kept sending him back with aspirin and half-hearted prayers. That morning I woke up to him gasping, his hands shaking, his Bible on the floor. "Henry," I said, rushing to his side. "Hold on, I'll get someone." He grabbed my wrist, weak but firm. Don't call them," he rasped. "They'll come too late. Don't talk like that," I said. "You'll be fine." He smiled. That slow, sad smile that old men have when they've already made peace with dying. "Listen to me, Peter. You'll get out. Maybe not soon, but you will. And when you do, don't waste the pain." Then he closed his eyes. I called for help anyway. Guards came 15 minutes later. Malone was one of them. He looked down at Henry's body and muttered, "One less mouth to feed." Something inside me snapped. I lunged forward, fists clenched, but 2 guards pinned me before I reached him. Malone's grin didn't move. He leaned close and whispered, "That old man believed in miracles. You'll die here too. They threw me into solitary for 30 days. No light, no sound. Just concrete, cold air and my own heartbeat. The first week I screamed until my voice broke. The second I whispered prayers. By the third, I didn't make a sound at all. When they finally opened the door, I stepped out with my beard grown wild and my eyes hollow. The world felt too bright, too loud. Malone passed me in the hallway and said, "Welcome back to hell." I didn't answer. I didn't look at him. I just kept walking, because something had changed inside me. Hope wasn't alive anymore. But something colder had taken its place, something that waited, patient and silent, for the day the truth would claw its way out of the grave. And when it did, I swore Malone would hear it first. I started writing to Emily on scraps, backs of commissary slips, the inside of cereal boxes, anything I could fold flat and hide under my mattress until mail day. The prison paper was cheap and grey, the ink bleeding like it wanted to run away from the page. I'd sit on the lower bunk after count, the tinny rattle of pipes above me, and press the pencil so hard my fingers cramped. "Dear Emily," I'd begin every time as if the right salutation could bridge the years. I told her about the yard, how the wind in winter carries a smell like pennies. I told her about the starlings that nested in the razor wire and looked like torn cloth when they rose. Mostly I told her about the world we lost, how she once fell asleep in my arms during the 7th-inning stretch, how Mary burned cinnamon candles when the first snow came, how the radiator in our old house coughed before it warmed. Sometimes I wrote to Mary too, careful and plain, like I was laying boards for a bridge that might one day reach her. "Mary," I'd say, "I won't ask for what you can't give. Only tell me our daughter is okay." I signed each letter with a promise I had no power to keep. "I will come home." At the mailroom window sat Officer Brenda Cole, a woman with square glasses and a locket she never took off. She stamped each envelope with a rubber thud, inspected, then slid them into a grey canvas bag. I learned the rhythm of that sound. I lived for it weeks past. The bag came back with other men's replies, creased and fingerprinted, hope inside thin white sleeves. Mine never came, not one. Officer Cole shook her head softly when I looked up. "Nothing for you today, Caldwell. Maybe tomorrow." Tomorrow turned into 4 years. One afternoon, a single envelope did arrive, creased, familiar, my own handwriting. Across the front, in hard black ink, address unknown. I held it to my chest, felt the paper crackle, and whispered her name. That night, someone slid another envelope under my cell door. No stamp, no seal. Inside, a single sentence in neat, careful script, "Stop writing ghosts." I looked down the corridor, and in the dim yellow light, Rick Malone was smiling. I kept writing anyway. I couldn't stop. Words were the only way I knew to remember who I'd been. On Sundays after chapel, I'd sit on the bench by the vending machines and fill 14 pages. Sometimes 20, like bailing water from a boat I refused to let sink. Pastor John Wilkes came twice that year. He read one of my letters, hands trembling, eyes glassy. "You still have your voice, Peter," he said. "Don't let them take it." I wanted to ask him why he'd stayed away, why the church ladies stopped sending banana bread and prayers, why the pews closed like a mouth around my name. But I only nodded and handed him an envelope for Emily. "Please," I said, "make sure she gets this one." He promised. Then he left, the smell of his aftershave, cedar and something sweet, lingering in the hallway like a memory I couldn't afford. A week later, the letter came back, this time creased, thumb-smudged, the stamped return to sender. Moved, no forwarding. Malone watched me read the stamp, his baton tapping the bars, tick, tick, tick. "Women move on," he said, not unkind, just cruel. "Kids forget." I wrote to Bill Turner, the apprentice who'd taken my shop. "Bill, I don't want money," I said. "I want to know if the neon clock still flickers in the winter, and if the coffee pot still groans in the morning. Tell me the shop is clean." He never answered. I wrote to Dr. Laura Bennett, the new prison psychologist, after hearing she listened more than she spoke. During our appointment, she sat with a yellow legal pad and eyes that didn't wander. "Write," she told me. "Even if no one reads it, write. It will keep you whole." I laughed once, sharp and ugly. "I'm not whole," she said. "Then write until you remember the shape." So I did. I wrote until my knuckles ached, and the pencil left indents on the page you could feel with your eyes closed. One night, as I tucked a thick letter beneath my mattress, I heard footsteps stop at my door. A whisper slid through the bars, low and careful. "Mail's a river, Caldwell. Some letters drown." When I turned, Malone's shadow was already walking away, whistling. The winter I turned 45, the heat clanged off and on like a stubborn heart. Frost crept over the inside of the window, lace made of breath. I wrote with gloves on, fingers numb, the pencil wobbling like an old man's cane. "Dear Emily," I pressed into the page. "Today the sky was the color of old denim. Do you still like blue?" I told her about the first snow in Riverton she'd ever seen, how she stuck her tongue out and laughed, the flakes melting like secrets. I told her I was sorry for not being there for the years that made her. "I didn't choose it," I wrote, "but the missing is still mine." A week later, Warden Frank Lattimore called me to his office. The room smelled like lemon cleaner and cold coffee, and the blinds cut the light into prison stripes. He slid a small stack of envelopes across the desk, my handwriting, my stamps, my hope. "Mail audit," he said flatly. These were held for content review. I picked one up. The flap had been sliced, the edges frayed like bitten nails. Inside, a photo. Emily at 5, the one I'd stared at until the edges curled. A sticky note on it in someone's square print. "Do not return contraband photographs." My chest caved in. "How long?" I asked. "Years," Lattimore said, eyes dull. "Policy changed." Nothing personal. Nothing personal. 30 envelopes of my life, stacked like a joke. Back in the block, I spread them on my bunk, a paper graveyard. Henry's empty bed stared at me from across the cell, sheet-tight, pillow-thin as a folded handkerchief. I read one letter aloud, then another, my own voice sounding like a stranger's. Men passing paused, eyes flicking quick and sad. I gathered the letters, tied them with twine, and slid them into the metal trunk under my bunk, a book of my absence, a family album without faces. That night the power hiccuped and died. The corridor went dark, only the emergency lights pulsing every few seconds like a heartbeat trying not to quit. In that rhythm I heard footsteps, measured, deliberate, then the rasp of keys. My door rattled once. "Evening, Caldwell," Malone's voice floated in, almost friendly. "Got a message for you." I waited, breath held, the room drowning in shadow. His silhouette leaned close to the bars. "Tomorrow," he said softly, "you'll finally get a letter." He laughed. And the light blinked out. I stood in the dark, fists clenched, heart wild with hope and dread, knowing that whatever showed up in the morning would either break me or make me dangerous. Morning count ended with the usual barked numbers and the sour smell of bleach. And then Officer Brenda Cole appeared at my bars with a thin white envelope, pinched between two fingers, like a fragile insect. "For you, Caldwell," she said, softer than usual. I knew the handwriting before I saw the name. Slanted, careful, like she used to make when practicing her E's and L's at the kitchen table. Emily. My hands shook so hard I almost tore it. Inside, 3 sentences. I don't know who you are. Mom says I should forgive, but I don't remember what I'm forgiving. Please stop writing me. Emily. The words hit like a hammer wrapped in silk. Not hate, not love. Worse, absence carved into ink. I folded the letter back along its crease and slid it into my pocket where it burned. That afternoon they assigned me a new laundry partner, a kid with winter blue eyes and a farm boy haircut. "Caleb Morgan," he said, offering a palm that had calluses like mine used to. He was 22, arrested in Wichita for a robbery he swore he didn't do. "Public defender said to take the deal," he muttered, loading sheets into the steam maw. I didn't. Judge made an example. He worked quiet, fast, no prison swagger, no dead stare. After an hour he nodded at the bulge in my shirt. "Bad news?" "My daughter," I said. She wrote. "That's not bad," he said. "It is when she asks you to disappear." Caleb looked at me for a long beat, then said, "They want us quiet." "You know that, right? Quiet's how they win." Something in me shifted at that. He spoke like a man standing at the edge of a cliff and refusing to jump. We finished the load and he added, without looking up, "I keep a notebook, dates, names, what they do. It's dumb if it's just me, but maybe 2 pens are louder than 1. The dryers hummed like engines starting. I felt the weight of Emily's letter against my ribs. "Bring the notebook," I said. "Tonight." And for the first time in years, the hum in the walls sounded less like despair and more like a fuse being lit. We met after lights out, the corridor pulsing with the red throb of emergency bulbs. Caleb slid a spiral notebook through the bars, cheap cardboard cover, corners crushed, the first page filled with tight, careful rows. June 12th. Malone shoved Ortega during count. June 18th, Walker denied insulin. July 3rd, a strip search and shower, no cause. Every line was a wound pinned to a date. "Paper won't live long in here," I said. "They search, they tear, they laugh," Caleb shrugged. "Then we make copies." The next day in the library we found carbon paper in a broken drawer behind outdated tax guides. I nearly laughed with the shock of it. We cut the sheets into squares and slid them under Caleb's notes, writing light so the copies wouldn't shine under a quick glance. We folded the duplicates into the spines of law books nobody touched and slipped the originals into the hollowed-out space I'd carved under the foam of my mattress, Henry's, old hiding place for his contraband Bible pages. We started naming everything. The smells, the phrases, the rhythms. Malone 10:14 p.m., preacher, batten to ribs left side, cafeteria, sour milk again, 12 trays turned. Infirmary, Dr. Laura Bennett, orders chest x-ray for inmate R. Harris, denied by Warden Lattimore. Budget. We were mapping hell with ink. I asked Dr. Bennett, "In our next session, what happens if I write?" She answered with a look that felt like a blessing and a warning. "Words make a record," she said. "Records outlive rooms." Then she slid a yellow legal pad across the table. "If you're going to keep one, be precise. Times, witnesses, language, and don't keep it all in one place." That night, Caleb whispered through the bars, "I've got a cousin who works nights at a print shop in Topeka. If we can get a packet out, maybe someone reads." I thought of Emily's letter, the way her handwriting closed the door without slamming it. Maybe I couldn't reach her, not yet, but I could scratch the truth into the world until it bled. We kept writing. We kept hiding. And then one afternoon on the tier, Malone caught me watching him. He smiled and tapped his baton against my bars. "Lose something, Caldwell?" he said. "Or keeping something?" His eyes slid to the mattress. The hum in the walls went razor sharp. The shakedown came at dawn. Boots and shouts and the tin scream of lockers yanked open. "Mattresses out." "Hands on the rail!" Malone's voice cut the air like a blade. I slid to my knees, heart jackhammering, as 2 officers flipped my bunk and split the foam with a box cutter. The hollow yawned open, empty. Caleb had moved the ledger in the night, tucking it into the torn lining of his state-issued jacket. He didn't look at me as they frisked him. He didn't blink when Malone leaned close and whispered, "You smell like paper, boy." They found nothing. Not that time. We changed tactics. I wrote letters that looked like prayers and hid names inside the first letters of each line. Caleb copied incident dates onto playing cards we traded at Chow, spades for medical neglect, hearts for beatings, clubs for solitary, diamonds for threats. We taught 3 other men, Noah Briggs, Elliot Crane, Wade Porter, to write the same way, to stash copies in the law library under Kansas Reports, 1981-1984, volumes nobody touched because the bindings snapped. One evening, Officer Brenda Cole lingered at my door after mail call. Her eyes flicked once to the camera, then back to me. "Your daughter's handwriting is beautiful," she said, almost a whisper. "I hope she writes again." And then, too fast for the camera, she slipped a scrap of paper between 2 magazines and walked on. Later, I unfolded it. Her number, an address in Kansas City, a name Claire Donovan. Under it 3 words. She listens carefully. "Who is she?" Caleb asked. "A reporter," I said, the word foreign in my mouth, like a taste from a childhood I barely remembered. We planned copies for Claire, routed through Brenda's cousin, a packet of grievance numbers and dates for Dr. Bennett to misfile, a list of men willing to speak if anyone would listen. That night, as I lay with my ear to the pillow, the hum in the walls sounded almost like wind in a field, like Kansas before bars. I pressed Emily's letter to my chest and whispered, "Not disappearing." "Not yet." Keys rattled down the tier. Malone's shadow broke the light at my door. He didn't speak. He just stood there long and still, as if he could smell the change. Then the keys moved on, and in the ringing quiet I knew. The fuse we'd lit was running under the concrete now, fast and glowing, where it would blow. We were about to find out. They rolled a dusty TV into the day room like it was an altar. Men crowded close, the screen throwing pale light over faces carved by time. I heard my name before I saw it, Peter Caldwell, and the room went quiet in that way a church does when the hymn ends and the truth begins. Claire Donovan stood on the steps of the Riverton courthouse, hair pinned back against the prairie wind, voice steady. She said words I'd waited a lifetime to hear. A forgotten evidence bag. A shirt never tested. DNA that does not match Peter Caldwell. The captions marched across the bottom like soldiers. Above them, pictures, my shop sign, the alley behind the diner, a cardboard box stained with the memory of rain. In the corner of the screen, a photo of Raymond Ray Doyle, sheriff's nephew, smirking beside a pickup. Claire's voice lowered. Sources confirm a database hit to Doyle's profile from a prior arrest in Tulsa. The room exhaled as one. Even the guards watched. I felt the TV's warmth on my skin. It felt like a sun that remembered my name. Back in the block, paper flew. Men who never spoke to me before slapped my shoulder, nodding once, twice, as if measuring a new weather. Caleb Morgan shoved through the crowd, eyes bright. "It's moving," he said, breathless. "It's finally moving." By supper, the noise had reached the warden. Frank Lattimore locked the yard for safety. He called me into his office, a cold room that smelled of lemon cleaner and distance. "You'll keep your head down," he said. "No speeches." "I don't have speeches," I told him. "Only a name to get back." That night, Susan Whitfield sat across the glass in the visiting room, her notes neat as fence posts. "We submitted the lab results," she said. Claire's piece turned the lights on. "Tomorrow we ask the court to reopen." She looked at me over the top of the folder. "They'll push back. District Attorney Leonard Price is already on radio calling this noise." I thought of the jury, of Mary's white-knuckle hands, of a little girl hiding her face in a mother's dress. "Noise," I said softly, and felt the old rage lift its head. "Tell him some noises are thunder." On the walk back to my cell, Rick Malone fell in step beside me. No smirk, no jab, just a measuring glance. His baton didn't touch the bars. He didn't say my name. The silence felt like a chair being pulled out. And somewhere deep in the building, the hum changed pitch, like the power had shifted rooms. They woke me before dawn for transport, chains whispering around my ankles, the world outside still ink-dark and smelling of wet earth. In the van's steel belly, I felt every bump like a memory. Riverton's courthouse rose out of the morning like a mirage, old bricks, new cameras, people pretending they hadn't been here the first time. Inside, Wooden pews creaked under the weight of a town trying not to look at itself. Mary sat in the second row, a grey scarf around her shoulders, hands folded in a way that used to mean grace before meals. She didn't try to touch me. Emily wasn't there. When Deputy Carl Jenkins took the stand, he gripped the rail so hard his knuckles went bloodless. "I was told to find what made people sleep easier," he said, voice ragged. "I found nothing. I was sent back." The shirt was clean. "I logged it the way I was told." He stared at the floor. "I am sorry." Price rose smooth as ever. "You expect us to believe you slept for 30 years and woke up with a conscience." Carl didn't flinch. "I expect you to believe in a box with my initials and the sheriff's handwriting." He pointed to the blown-up photo of 12. The courtroom murmured, a hive stirred by smoke. Then Susan placed the lab's printout on the easel. She didn't say alleles or profiles, or any word a person couldn't carry in their pocket. She said simply, "This blood is not Peter Caldwell's, it is a man's blood. A specific man's, his name is Raymond Doyle." She let the name hang there, heavy and obvious like a storm cloud. Somebody in the back hissed, "Hargrove's kin." Heads turned. Sheriff Tom Hargrove stared straight ahead, jaw working. His badge looked dull under the lights, like a coin that had been rubbed too long. The judge didn't free me. Not yet. He ordered more time, more review, words that tasted like chalk. But I saw it. A sliver of sky where there had been only ceiling. When the hearing ended, Mary stood as I passed. Her voice was barely breath. "Peter." The guard tugged my chain. I couldn't stop. Back at the jail door, Malone waited with the cuffs. He looked at my face the way a man studies weather. The metal kissed my wrists. He didn't tighten them. He didn't loosen them either. "Long day," he said. "For you," I answered. His pale eyes flickered. And then the van swallowed me again, the road drumming out a rhythm that sounded like a heart insisting on itself. The next days came like horses at a gallop. No time to breathe, only to hang on. Claire's second piece ran with voices, a retired clerk recalling a rushed inventory, a diner cook remembering Ray Doyle's temper, a paramedic who swore he saw Hargrove leaving the alley the night Lisa died. Off the clock, face white as a sheet. Phones lit, old doors opened. Riverton started telling on itself. Price offered Susan a private conversation in a side room. She came back with her jaw set. "They're dangling a deal," she said. "Time served. You walk today if you sign a paper saying you accept the original verdict." I laughed once, bitter, thin. "They want me free but guilty." "They want you quiet," she said. Then softer. "It's your life, Peter. I'll carry whatever you decide." I thought of Emily reading, "Please stop writing me." I thought of Henry's last words, "Don't waste the pain." I shook my head. No paper. Not that paper. That night, Officer Brenda Cole slid a stamped envelope through my bars. The return address was a place I didn't know. Inside, a short note in a grown woman's hand. I saw the news. "I'm not ready to visit, but I'm ready to read. Emily." There was a postscript. "Was the radiator really as loud as you said?" I pressed the paper to my mouth. The radiator. The cough before warmth. The first small door creaking open. Near midnight, sirens wailed far away. Riverton, maybe Wichita. In the grey hour before dawn, Claire's voice crackled from the TV in the guard booth. "State police have taken Raymond Doyle into custody for questioning," she said. "He denies involvement." Behind her, a cruiser door shut like a final period. The tier light snapped on. Keys came boots, a hand on my door. Malone stood there with two officers behind him, a different stiffness in his shoulders, like a man holding a hot pan and trying not to show it. "Caldwell," he said. Voice even, "Pack your things." My throat went dry. "Why?" He looked at me, really looked, and in his eyes I saw a world starting to tilt. "Because they want you downtown at first light," he said. "Judge's orders." He hesitated, just one breath. "Where are the good shoes?" He turned the key. The bolt slid back with a sound I had listened to for 31 years. Iron on iron, habit on bone. Only now it meant something else. I stared at the open door like a man staring at the ocean after a life in a well. And in the cold corridor, with dawn pooling under the windows, I felt it. The moment before a storm breaks, the air holding its breath. It was still dark when they came for me. Not the angry kind of dark, the quiet kind, the kind that hums like it's listening. The hallway lights flickered once, And then I heard the clink of keys, the soft scrape of boots on concrete. I'd lived 31 years inside those sounds, but this time they felt different, slower, careful. "Caldwell," a voice called. "On your feet." I sat up, bones creaking like old wood. The door slid open. Rick Malone stood there. Same eyes, same pale stare. But the smirk, the thing I'd built my hatred around, was gone. He held the keys in both hands, as if afraid to drop them. "Judge signed the order," he said quietly. "You're to be released." The words hung there like smoke that wouldn't clear. For a second I thought it was a cruel joke, another of his games. But then he said something I never thought I'd hear. "Sir," he said, his voice catching. "You'll need to pack your things, sir." The word didn't fit right. It scratched the air. It was the same man who once made me scrub floors with a toothbrush, who'd laughed when I coughed blood, who'd told me I'd die here. And now he was calling me sir. I looked at him. He couldn't hold my gaze. His jaw worked like he wanted to say more, but the words wouldn't come. I stood slowly, folding the few things I had. A photo of Emily, yellowed letters, a Bible Henry had left me. The sound of my own breathing filled the cell. When I turned back, Malone stepped aside. "Bus leaves in an hour," he said. "They'll take you to Topeka for processing." "Processing," I repeated, as if I was still another form to be stamped, another number to be filed. He nodded. "I'll walk you out." For years I'd dreamed of this moment, walking out the way I came in, head high, air clean. But now that it was here, it felt like standing at the edge of a cliff I'd spent half my life climbing. And somewhere behind me, the hum of the prison walls whispered, "Don't look back." They led me through corridors that had aged with me. Paint peeling, pipes sweating rust, the smell of bleach and sweat mixing into something permanent. Prison smells like regret. It seeps into the concrete and never leaves. Men stirred behind their bars as I passed. Some nodded. Some whispered my name like a prayer. Caleb Morgan pressed his face to the bars, grinning. "You did it," he said. "No," I told him. "We did." He laughed once, shaking his head. "Get out there and breathe for us." The guards moved me along. Every door opened slower than the last, as if the building itself didn't want to let go. When we reached the last gate, the sky was beginning to bruise with dawn. Malone keyed the lock, his hands steady but his breath unsteady. He didn't look like a monster anymore, just a tired man who'd run out of excuses. 31 years, he murmured. "Longer than I've been married. Longer than I've had my son." I stared at the gate. The bars looked thinner than I remembered. He cleared his throat. "Caldwell." I turned toward him. "Don't," I said softly. "You had your 31 years to say it." He swallowed hard. Then he nodded, eyes glassy, and pushed the gate open. A wind came through, cold and clean, brushing against my face like something alive. It smelled like rain and earth and freedom, and it hurt. It hurt because I didn't know how to breathe it anymore. As I stepped forward, the chain around my ankles clinked one last time. A guard knelt and unlatched it. The sound it made hitting the ground, small, final, echoed down the corridor like a bell for the dead. Malone's voice broke the silence. "Good luck." "Sir," I didn't answer. I just kept walking, my shadow stretching out in front of me, thin and trembling in the new light. And as the gate closed behind me, the sound wasn't a slam. It was a sigh. They processed me in Topeka under buzzing fluorescent lights. Cameras flashed. Forms were signed. Hands I didn't know shook mine like I was something noble, something clean. I smiled where I was told to smile. When I stepped outside, the sun was blinding. The air was too big. Cars rushed past like water, and the noise, God, the noise felt like another kind of prison. Susan Whitfield waited by the curb with Claire Donovan beside her. Claire's eyes were wet. "You're free," she said. I wanted to tell her freedom didn't feel the way people think it does. It wasn't joy. It was silence, too much of it. In the car, I stared out the window at the Kansas fields rolling by. I'd missed the world's color. I'd missed the way light bends on wheat, the smell of diesel on the highway, the sight of crows lifting off fence posts like they'd never been caged. At a rest stop, I asked to step out. The ground felt uneven beneath me, like it was still moving. I looked down at my hands, thin, veined, pale from years of fluorescent light, and thought, these don't belong to me anymore. That night in a motel room, Susan brought me a paper bag with a clean shirt, jeans and a phone I didn't know how to use. "Tomorrow," she said, "we'll talk about what comes next. When she left, I sat on the bed staring at the door. For the first time in 31 years, it wasn't locked. I could walk out anywhere, any time, but I didn't, because freedom is heavy when you've forgotten how to carry it. I lay back, the hum of the air conditioner replacing the hum of the prison walls, and thought about Malone's voice calling me sir, about Henry's words, Caleb's grin, Emily's letter. Tomorrow, I would see my daughter again, but tonight, I just listened to the silence, the sound of a world too wide, and wondered if I'd ever belong to it again. The drive back to Riverton felt longer than the sentence itself. Every mile brought ghosts to the window, old fields, rusted barns, the outline of my shop now painted blue with someone else's name on the sign. Turner Auto & Sons. I watched it slide by and felt my throat tighten, remembering the grease under my nails, the laughter that used to live in that space. 31 years gone, and still the smell of oil and steel lived in my blood. Susan Whitfield slowed the car as we crossed Main Street. People stopped on the sidewalks, their eyes following us, half curious, half afraid, like they were seeing someone who'd come back from the dead. I saw a boy on a bike stare at me, tilt his head and whisper something to his friend. I used to know everyone here. Now I knew no one. We pulled into the driveway of a small white house on Willow Lane. The curtains twitched before the door opened. Mary stood there, older, thinner, her hair streaked with silver. She looked like someone who had learned to live quietly with ghosts. Behind her a man appeared, tall in a pressed shirt, wedding band shining under the porch light. Her husband now. I froze halfway up the walk. Mary took one hesitant step forward. "Peter," she said. My name sounded fragile in her mouth, as if it might break if she said it twice. I nodded. "You look well. So do you." Her eyes darted over me, cataloguing the years, the wrinkles, the scars, the weight of time. "Emily's here," she added. At the sound of her name, my heart tripped. And then there she was, Emily. Not 5 years old with braids and scraped knees. A grown woman, her hair the same honey brown as her mother's, her face older but still familiar in a way that hurt to look at. She stood on the porch steps, clutching a coffee mug like armor. "Hi," she said softly, my voice caught. "Hi." Silence filled the space between us, thick as smoke. "I didn't know if you'd come," she said. "I didn't know if I should." Her eyes glistened. "Mom said you deserved the chance." The man on the porch shifted awkwardly. Mary turned to him and whispered, "It's okay, Dan." He nodded and went inside, leaving the door half open, light spilling across the threshold. For a long time, none of us spoke. Then Emily said, "Do you want to come in?" I did, but my legs wouldn't move. The porch light buzzed above us, moths spinning around it like lost souls. "I don't want to ruin your peace," I said finally. Mary's voice cracked. "You already paid for something you didn't do, Peter. Don't pay again." I looked at Emily. Her eyes were searching me, trying to find the father she remembered. I wished I could find him too. And so, after 31 years, I stepped back into my own house as a stranger. The living room smelled like lemon polish and fresh coffee, normal things, simple things, the kind of smells that shouldn't make a man tremble. Pictures lined the mantel. Mary and Dan on vacation. Emily in a graduation gown, a baby boy in her arms, my grandson. My breath caught, she noticed. "His name's Evan," she said. "He's 5. 5. The same age she'd been when I left. I tried to speak, but the words felt rusted shut. "He looks like you." "People say that," she said, then smiled, a quick, shy thing that cracked the distance just a little. We sat at the kitchen table. Mary poured coffee, her hands shaking only once. The silence between us was a creature with claws. I wanted to tell her everything, the nights in solitary, Henry's death, Malone's cruelty, but I couldn't bring that darkness into this house. Not yet, so I asked instead, "Did you get any of my letters?" Emily looked down. "Some. Mom kept them in a box. I didn't read them for a long time. Why now?" She hesitated. "Because when I saw your face on the news, you didn't look like a monster. You looked tired. Tired. The word was kind." Mary spoke softly. "Emily was angry for a long time. So was I." "I know," I said. "I had every right." Mary's eyes filled and she looked away. "I should have fought harder for you." "No," I whispered. "You fought enough." The system wasn't built for truth. It was built for closure. Emily reached into her bag and pulled out one of my old letters, creased and faded. She slid it across the table. "You wrote this one the year Grandpa died. You said you could still hear the sound of his laugh." I nodded. "I wrote that in the dark." "I know," she said. "You always ended them with 'I'll come home.' I didn't believe you then. But you did. I wanted to tell her I hadn't come home, I'd just arrived at what was left of it. But when she took my hand, small and trembling, I stayed silent. Because for one fragile moment I felt like a father again." The drive back to Riverton felt longer than the sentence itself. Every mile brought ghosts to the window. Old fields, rusted barns, the outline of my shop, now painted blue with someone else's name on the sign. Turner Auto and Sons. I watched it slide by and felt my throat tighten, remembering the grease under my nails, the laughter that used to live in that space. 31 years gone, and still the smell of oil and steel lived in my blood. Susan Whitfield slowed the car as we crossed Main Street. People stopped on the sidewalks, their eyes following us, half curious, half afraid, like they were seeing someone who'd come back from the dead. I saw a boy on a bike stare at me, tilt his head and whisper something to his friend. I used to know everyone here. Now I knew no one. We pulled into the driveway of a small white house on Willow Lane. The curtains twitched before the door opened. Mary stood there, older, thinner, her hair streaked with silver. She looked like someone who had learned to live quietly with ghosts. Behind her a man appeared, tall in a pressed shirt, wedding band shining under the porch light. Her husband now. I froze halfway up the walk. Mary took one hesitant step forward. "Peter," she said. My name sounded fragile in her mouth, as if it might break if she said it twice. I nodded. "You look well. So do you." Her eyes darted over me, cataloguing the years, the wrinkles, the scars, the weight of time. "Emily's here," she added. At the sound of her name, my heart tripped. And then there she was, Emily, not 5 years old with braids and scraped knees. A grown woman, her hair the same honey brown as her mother's, her face older but still familiar in a way that hurt to look at. She stood on the porch steps, clutching a coffee mug like armor. "Hi," she said softly, my voice caught. "Hi." Silence filled the space between us, thick as smoke. "I didn't know if you'd come," she said. "I didn't know if I should." Her eyes glistened. "Mom said you deserved the chance." The man on the porch shifted awkwardly. Mary turned to him and whispered, "It's okay, Dan." He nodded and went inside, leaving the door half open, light spilling across the threshold. For a long time, none of us spoke. Then Emily said, "Do you want to come in?" I did, but my legs wouldn't move. The porch light buzzed above us, moths spinning around it like lost souls. "I don't want to ruin your peace," I said finally. Mary's voice cracked. "You already paid for something you didn't do, Peter. Don't pay again." I looked at Emily. Her eyes were searching me, trying to find the father she remembered. I wished I could find him too. And so, after 31 years, I stepped back into my own house as a stranger. The living room smelled like lemon polish and fresh coffee, normal things, simple things, the kind of smells that shouldn't make a man tremble. Pictures lined the mantel. Mary and Dan on vacation. Emily in a graduation gown, a baby boy in her arms, my grandson. My breath caught, she noticed. "His name's Evan," she said. "He's 5. 5. The same age she'd been when I left. I tried to speak, but the words felt rusted shut. "He looks like you." "People say that," she said, then smiled, a quick, shy thing that cracked the distance just a little. We sat at the kitchen table. Mary poured coffee, her hands shaking only once. The silence between us was a creature with claws. I wanted to tell her everything, the nights in solitary, Henry's death, Malone's cruelty, but I couldn't bring that darkness into this house. Not yet, so I asked instead, "Did you get any of my letters?" Emily looked down. "Some. Mom kept them in a box. I didn't read them for a long time. Why now?" She hesitated. "Because when I saw your face on the news, you didn't look like a monster. You looked tired. Tired. The word was kind." Mary spoke softly. "Emily was angry for a long time. So was I." "I know," I said. "I had every right." Mary's eyes filled and she looked away. "I should have fought harder for you." "No," I whispered. "You fought enough." The system wasn't built for truth. It was built for closure. Emily reached into her bag and pulled out one of my old letters, creased and faded. She slid it across the table. "You wrote this one the year Grandpa died. You said you could still hear the sound of his laugh." I nodded. "I wrote that in the dark." "I know," she said. "You always ended them with 'I'll come home.' I didn't believe you then." "But you did." I wanted to tell her I hadn't come home, I'd just arrived at what was left of it. But when she took my hand, small and trembling, I stayed silent, because for one fragile moment I felt like a father again. That night, they let me stay in the guest room. The bed was soft, too soft. I couldn't sleep. I kept listening for the sounds prison had taught me to hear. Keys, footsteps, the metal groan of doors. But there was only wind, and the slow, steady breathing of a house that had learned to live without me. I walked quietly into the hallway. The walls were covered with photographs, years I'd missed, lives I'd never touched. Emily in a cap and gown, Mary at Christmas, Evan blowing out birthday candles. Every image was a life that had gone on, a world that hadn't waited for me. In the reflection of a framed photo, I saw my own face, older, hollowed out. I looked like a ghost haunting a life that no longer belonged to him. In the kitchen, a light was on. Mary sat at the table, robe pulled tight around her shoulders. She looked up. "Can't sleep." 31 years of concrete floors, I said. "Beds feel strange." She smiled faintly. "Do you hate me?" The question sliced through me. "No, never." Her eyes softened. "Then forgive me, I wanted to. God, I wanted to. But forgiveness is slower than freedom. It doesn't come with signatures or stamps. It has to crawl its way through the cracks of everything broken." We sat there for a long time, the clock ticking between us. Finally, she said, "Emily wants you to meet Evan tomorrow. Maybe that's a start." I nodded, my throat tight. "Maybe?" When she went back to bed, I stood by the window and watched the night bleed into dawn. Somewhere in the distance, a train passed, the same sound that used to lull me to sleep when Emily was small. And for the first time since walking out of that cell, I let the tears come. Not the angry kind, the kind that wash, that make room for breath. But even as they fell, I knew this. Freedom wasn't the end of my sentence. It was just another beginning I didn't know how to live. Still, when I closed my eyes, I whispered the same words I'd written on every letter for 3 decades. "I'm home, sweetheart. I'm home." The morning sunlight in Riverton looked the same as it had 31 years ago, except it didn't. It was brighter, harsher, like the world had learned to live without me and didn't need to soften its edges anymore. I stood outside Caldwell's auto repair, or what used to be mine, and watched a young man wipe his hands on a rag just like I used to. The sign above the door read, "Turner Auto and Sons, the paint clean, the windows new." I walked closer. Inside, Bill Turner, the kid who once called me boss, looked up from under a lifted hood. For a second, recognition flared and then dimmed into guilt. "Peter," he said slowly, "I didn't think you'd come by." "I almost didn't," I said, "but I wanted to see what survived." He looked down. "I kept the tools. Some of the old posters. Didn't seem right to throw them out." I nodded. "You kept it alive. That's something." He hesitated, then wiped his palms again. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry. The town—" No one knew what to believe. I smiled faintly. They believed what was easiest. Outside, the wind carried the smell of motor oil and summer dust. I stood in that scent, my scent, and felt both comforted and hollow. This had been my temple, my livelihood, my pride. Now it was just a memory someone else rented. Before I left, Bill called after me. "Peter, if you ever want to work, part-time, anything, I'd make room." I looked back at the sign, at his young face trying to fix something that couldn't be fixed. "Thank you," I said. "But I don't think these hands remember how to belong here." He nodded. "Then where will you go?" I didn't answer. I just walked down Main Street, past the diner where Lisa Garrison once smiled at me over coffee, past the courthouse steps where the world had ended, past the church that had gone silent. Every step echoed with ghosts, and all of them were mine. Freedom, I realized, isn't about where you can go. It's about learning how to live with where you've been, and I was still learning. That afternoon, Emily drove me to the park near the river. The same swing still creaked in the wind, the same oak tree bent over the water like an old friend. She brought Evan, who ran ahead chasing a red ball, laughing the way only children and the innocent can. His laughter hit me like sunlight through bars. "Does he know who I am?" I asked quietly. She nodded. I told him you were my dad. He said, Grandpa's finally home. The word Grandpa sat in my chest like a gift I didn't deserve. I watched the boy run, his hair catching the light, and felt a tear slide down my cheek before I could stop it. Emily sat beside me on the bench. Do you ever get angry? She asked. Every day, I said. But anger's like rust. It eats the inside of the thing it lives in. She was quiet for a moment. I want to know who you were before all this. Mom said you used to whistle when you worked. I smiled. I did. Drove her crazy. She laughed, and it was the first sound that felt real since I'd walked free. Maybe we can find that man again, she said. I looked at her. Really looked. The woman my little girl had become without me. Maybe, I whispered. But I think he stayed back there, fixing engines that don't run anymore. Evan ran back, holding a dandelion. Make a wish, Grandpa. I blew gently. The seeds scattering into the wind, little pieces of nothing carried toward the river. What did you wish for? Emily asked. Nothing, I said. I've had enough wishes. But when she smiled and leaned her head on my shoulder, I knew that was a lie. I still wished for more time, for peace, for a way to forgive the years that stole both. The letter from Claire Donovan arrived a week later. Typed, crisp, professional, yet personal. Raymond Doyle pled guilty to manslaughter in exchange for full disclosure. Sheriff Hargrove resigned. Deputy Jenkins's testimony cited in multiple reform cases. You've become a name that means something, Peter. I read it twice. A name that means something. After 3 decades of being a number, that should have felt like victory. It didn't. It felt like standing in a field after a tornado, alive, yes, but surrounded by everything that would never be rebuilt. That night I walked alone to the river. The sky was heavy with stars, and the sound of water moving over stones reminded me of the hum inside the prison walls. Only now it was softer, almost kind. I thought of Henry Brooks, his calm eyes. Don't waste the pain. I thought of Caleb, still behind bars, still fighting. I thought of Malone, the man who once beat me for breathing too loud, calling me sir. I wondered if he slept at night, or if the echoes of my name lived in his head. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out Emily's first letter, the one that had begun, I don't know who you are. I tore it in half, then in half again, and let the pieces drift into the river. The current took them easily. The wind off the water carried the smell of rust and rain. I closed my eyes and let it wash over me. I wasn't angry anymore, just tired. But as I turned back toward the road, I saw something small and bright, a paper dandelion seed stuck to my shoe, left over from that afternoon in the park. I bent down, held it in my hand, and smiled. Maybe freedom wasn't about erasing what was lost. Maybe it was about carrying what survived. I looked toward the horizon where the town lights met the dark and whispered, I'm still here. And somewhere, I hoped, the ones I'd loved, Henry, Caleb, even Mary, heard it too. If you like this story, please like this video. Subscribe to the channel and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left.